I'm going to show you how to replace the front brake pads and rotors on a Mazda CX-5. I have a 2016, but this process is similar for other Mazdas and even other makes and models. If you find this content helpful, please subscribe to the channel. So like I said, I have a 2016 Mazda CX-5. If you're looking for a video on how to do the rear brakes that involve a special process with the electronic parking brake, I'll link to it here. But in this case, only the front brakes need changing because we hear an aggressive grinding noise when braking. So the first thing we're going to do is chock the wheels, the rear wheels, because we're lifting up the front of the vehicle. Loosen the lug nuts while the vehicle's still on the ground. And this is a 21 millimeter on this vehicle. Once the lug nuts are loose, find a jacking point, and unfortunately I had to use the pinch weld to lift the vehicle. There's not many jacking points, and put my jack stand where you saw it there. And I use my drill to make this process faster. Again, the 21 millimeter for the lug nuts. Once the wheel is off, you can then remove this clip that holds the brake line into place. It'll help move the caliper around easier later. And it can be stuck in there kind of rusty. You might have to spray it with penetrating oil, but I then use a bungee cord. You could also use a hanger to hang these brake components after we remove these two slide pins, which are 14 millimeter bolts. They shouldn't have that much tightness to them, only about 25 foot-pounds. And then you can slide off the top of the caliper and use that bungee cord to make sure that the brake line doesn't get stretched out. And just set it off to the side as best you can. Now, at this point, I'm just gonna do this because I got the camera where it is. I'm gonna take the slide pins out. You be careful not to tear that boot. So I kind of held the boot and then pulled the pin out, wiped it down to remove the old grease. Try to get a little more out. And I apply this AGS brake lubricant called Slide Glide to help reduce squeaking and keep those slide pins nice and lubed so the brakes don't lock up. And I just apply a liberal coating to it and put it back in, making sure to secure the boot back to the slide pin. Same thing with the bottom one. I'm careful to remove it, holding the boot in place and then removing the slide pin. And again, making sure that it's secure. And now I remove the pads, and you can see the edges of those pads are worn pretty bad because the rotor is no longer good also. It's worn unevenly. Now I can use, I believe, a 17 millimeter to remove the caliper bolts. These ones are under about 75 foot-pounds of torque, so they're a little harder. I got my big half-inch driver, and then I use my smaller one to unwind it. And with those two 17 millimeters off, the brake caliper comes undone from the knuckle. And we already lubricated the slide pins, so we're going to replace this hardware right here, which come with the new brake pads. You could use the old ones if you were in a pinch, but always replace these hardwares as it will help the brake pads operate correctly. Make sure those are secure exactly in the same way that you took them off. Apply a good amount of the Slide Glide to the caliper pins, but I only apply a small amount to any other metal on metal surface. So since we're replacing the rotors, you can just use a hammer to knock it off because they get kind of corroded to each other. Then we can remove it and see that the whole inner side of one of the rotors was completely worn. So I got these Duralast Golds. There was the part number, and I just sprayed a little bit of this penetrating oil just to clean up the area, and hopefully it doesn't rust if we do have to take the rotor off in the near future. And on with the new rotor. And then I use a lug nut to hold it into place. With that nice and secure, we can now reattach the caliper parts with the 17 millimeter bolts and the now fresh hardware and lubricated slide pins. And you're just going to want to make sure those are nice and secure, top and bottom, and then we will torque them down to 75 foot-pounds. That is what they call for. So now I'm using the torque wrench, triple checking it, make sure it is above 75 foot-pounds. So with those two bolts completed, I can now lubricate where the calipers actually meet that hardware that we replaced. And I just apply a very tiny amount of the Slide Glide to where the caliper will actually move in the hardware. So just a tiny bit where the tabs are on the brake pads. So in with the outer brake pad, and just slides into place exactly how you took it out. And the inner brake pad has this little special tab the wear bar indicator. When you start to hear that, it's time to replace your brakes. So make sure that goes on the inner pad, or rather the pad that the piston actually pushes on, because that will have more of the brake pad worn, so you'll know sooner. So those brake pads are nice and secure. I apply, again, a very tiny amount of the slide glide to the outer mounting plates of the brake pads. Since we replaced the brake pads, we now need to retract the caliper, and I have this special brake caliper retracting tool that you use the old pad with, and then you can then push it, and it basically pushes the caliper back into place. And you want to make sure to do this very straight and evenly, but you could also use a big pair of channel locks if you didn't have that tool available, and you want to do it slowly and evenly. So I'm going to secure that right over the new brake pads, and then with the slide pin bolts, the 14 millimeters, be careful not to over tighten these. It's only about 25 foot-pounds of torque. If you were using power air guns, you could easily break those off, which would be a nightmare to have to replace. But again, 25 foot-pounds, make sure those are nice and secure. You could even go a little above, but just not too much. And then we secure the brake line that we removed earlier back into place by just tapping it in with a hammer. Make sure you remove your bungee cord or hanger and the lug nut used to keep the brake rotor in place, as the pads now hold it into place. Now we can put the tire back on. 21 millimeter lug nuts. Make sure they're all secure in a star pattern. Then we can lower the vehicle and then torque them to 100 foot-pounds once it's on the ground. I usually go about 100 foot-pounds for any tire. So again, in a star pattern, now we can go in the vehicle and pump the brakes with the vehicle on. We pump the brakes because they're soft at first, and then they become firm. Keep pumping until they become firm. Again, this is very important, so keep pumping a bunch of times. Make sure they're firm. Now, when you're out driving, go up to about 15 miles an hour, apply the brakes firmly, then up to about 25 miles an hour, apply the brakes firmly, and again, up to about 45 and even 55 miles an hour, as these will seat the brake pads and make them wear more evenly over time. So I did it about up to 45 a few times, even pressure. I can kind of smell the brakes wearing. But after a few times, you should be good. So if you found this content helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.